Could we be living in a timeline where a retcon villain from a critically panned game that basically changed the trajectory of one of the biggest franchises of all time is potentially coming back? Conventionally attractive humans, my name is RidersDX, and today we are talking about none other than Mephiles the Dark. Now, let me just say, with Mephiles the Dark, man, I remember the day that I got to the last boss of Sonic 06 for the very first time, and just being an absolute awe of like how big of a villain this guy felt like. I mean, spoilers, but it's been almost 20 years, so at this point, you know, if you don't know, then go home. But Mephiles is the one villain who has managed to kill Sonic the Hedgehog in the entire franchise, at least in this canon. I don't know about the comics or whatever, but at least in the main video game canon, this is the one moment that Sonic was actually killed. So that alone is like a huge thing about Mephiles that makes him one of the biggest and probably most noteworthy villains of all time. It's also the fact that he was so noteworthy and big that he had to be erased from the timeline. So the reason I want to bring up this question today is because Mephiles recently came back in Shadow Generations to everyone's surprise, or maybe not surprise depending on who you ask, and he is clearly a huge highlight of this game. There is something in the sauce of what they did to Mephiles in this game that really helped to highlight and exude just how epic and great of a villain he actually is. And so what I want to talk about in today's video is a little background on who Mephiles actually is and why he was even brought back in Shadow Generations in the first place, what they did in Shadow Generations to really highlight the strengths of this character and why so many people are taking notice of Mephiles now, and the potential of whether or not Mephiles actually has a future beyond this game, because obviously there's a few different complications we have to work through for that to actually happen. But I did come up with some theories as to what they could potentially do to bring this character back in a more, I guess, noteworthy way. So we're gonna go do all that today, so stick with me, because if you like really dark and absolutely terrifying villains in a Sonic franchise, then Mephiles is about the darkest you can get. Like, he literally is psychological terror. That's the kind of villain that he seems to be to me. He's like a much more effective Black Doom in a way. So who is Mephiles? So Mephiles originally came from Sonic 06. You all know that game at this point, but Sonic 06 was a very noteworthy game for a lot of reasons, but one of them was the storyline. The storyline definitely had some interesting foundations in the origins and the buildup of Solaris, which was the eventual villain that all the hedgehogs had to fight against in their super forms. Mephiles is one half of that creature, and Mephiles is what you can consider the brains of the operation, the one who's the most conniving, who has the most motivation to do the most evil. Iblis is just is a dog. He's basically a dog, just sent out to do whatever the owner's bidding is and cause mass destruction in this case. Mephiles is the one that's guiding everything, that's calling all the shots and just crafting the ultimate plan to take over the world, or, you know, honestly, eradicate everyone. What makes Mephiles so interesting to me is the fact that he truly is the main villain of Sonic 06, despite the fact that Sonic really doesn't interact that much with Mephiles. No, that honor was given to Shadow the Hedgehog, who had to fight Mephiles directly throughout the entire game. And the thing about Mephiles and Shadow's appearing is, well, obviously physically Mephiles mimics the image of Shadow, which is just the nature of his form. Mephiles was sealed in a scepter of darkness beforehand, and once he got released from the scepter, he took on the first form he could find, which was Shadow the Hedgehog. And I think it's just very interesting to have Mephiles take the form of Shadow, because this is what Shadow essentially was when he first debuted against Sonic. Shadow was basically Sonic's shadow in a way, and now Shadow has his own shadow, which is Mephiles, who truly exudes the deepest and darkest qualities of Shadow that we've seen in the games. Mephiles spends the entire game trying to tease Shadow back into his more destructive and evil ways in terms of getting revenge on the humans for wronging him and such. But throughout Sonic 06, Shadow proves that he is much more strong-headed than he used to be, and that he's not easily swayed, and that he has a better and clear understanding of what he actually wants in this world. And you see this whole battle basically just get mapped out throughout the game between him and Mephiles, and it truly is one of the most effective storylines I've ever seen in a Sonic game. I cannot praise the storyline enough. I know Sonic 06 has a lot of issues in terms of story, but that definitely was not one of them. Mephiles was a great villain, and the way that he and Shadow Shadow played off of each other was brilliantly done. And so obviously at the end, Mephiles gets defeated and Sonic and Elise essentially changed time so that Solaris was never going to exist in this timeline. And so as a result of erasing his origins, Mephiles ceased to exist. And now we come over to Shadow Generations, his first appearance since Sonic 06, which is a little jarring because, well, yeah, even though Shadow Generations does a lot of things with time travel, Mephiles was written out of the games. He was written out of the canon. Even under the pretense of time travel, it does not really seem like a direct explanation as to why Mephiles might be back. But they do expand upon Mephiles' return over here, and I'll talk a little more about that later. But basically, you get to the point in the game where it's time to face off against another boss, but unlike the bosses that you've battled previously, this boss is hidden in an underground tomb that kind of reminds you like an Egyptian tomb, kind of like where they would bury the pharaohs. And so Shadow has to find this tomb, travel throughout it, only to find a boss gate, which requires 4 boss keys to access, which is 1 extra key compared to the 3 keys beforehand. So you get an immediate feeling that this boss is a little special. It's not just the Bio Lizard, it's not just Metal Overlord. It's a bit of a different boss that requires a little more gatekeeping. And so you get the boss keys and you enter it, and of course you come into contact with the Scepter of Darkness, which releases Mephiles, and Mephiles makes his grand stand to try to return to the canon. And so throughout this boss fight, Mephiles talks about wanting to restore himself within the timeline, and of course Shadow has no idea who Mephiles is due to the events of Sonic 06. And so Shadow is left confused as to who this is and why he's attacking him, but of course Shadow takes it like a pro and just attacks Mephiles relentlessly and defeats him. The biggest crime of this game, I mean, Shadow Generations is pretty great. I've gone over that in multiple videos so far, so feel free to check them out. But the one thing that they did that was not great is the fact that they buried Mephiles' lines in this music, and you can't even hear some of the most iconic things this guy is saying because of how loud the music is. So listen to some of the things that Mephiles is saying during this boss battle. Like, it will shock you.
What? Did you forget about me again? I owe much to you, Shadow. I will defeat you, then restore myself to the timeline. Welcome, Shadow, to the ultimate game of Shadow Tag! Drown in darkness! Dance, my shadows, dance! Take this! Let my blade give you a taste of despair! It's time to raise the curtain on this macabre play. Tisk tisk. Surely you can't be serious. Did you really think I'd fall for the same trick twice? I might consider sparing you. I'm disappointed, Shadow. Truly disappointed. No! I want to exist!
That line, "I want to exist," sounds so desperate, and just, it hits different because so many people have heard this line now that people have actually grown pity for Mephiles or feel bad for Mephiles and think that, hey, maybe he does deserve another chance to come back into the timeline. But we all know damn well that that thing has to stay dead and non-existent because Mephiles literally almost caused the destruction of the entire world. And so Mephiles is of course defeated, and he goes back to whichever like white void he was stuck in, and the game continues on. But I have to say, when this boss fight actually happened, I was flabbergasted. I mean, to be honest, I really wish that they kept Mephiles a secret before the game launched, because if they had not teased Mephiles, this would have been such a groundbreaking, like, viral moment on like social media, because Mephiles is a villain that you would understand if they didn't want to include him, because again, he is not part of the canon, and he is also from Sonic 06, which is not the most celebrated Sonic game here. And so the fact that Mephiles not only came back but was brought back in such an amazing and effective way, it shocks me. It absolutely shocks me. They could have very well put Infinite here. Let's be honest here. They really could have put Infinite here, because Infinite does have a somewhat direct rivalry against Shadow. And I mean, even if Shadow doesn't know who he is, that is explained later on in the game that Shadow does go to areas that he hasn't gone to before because of the, you know, the realities of messing with the time stream. You're going to go to places both in the past and in the future. So that would have totally made sense. At least a lot more sense than Mephiles. But Gerald does explain later on in the game that Shadow could be facing foes that he's never interacted with before due to the damage to the time-space continuum. And so that's an easy enough explanation, but definitely a bit of a stretch to like kind of showcase just how intense this fracture in the timeline is. But yeah, I mean, Mephiles, man. Mephiles is definitely the best and my favorite boss in this game, and also one of the most effective storylines in this game as well. Like, Mephiles was done so much justice, and I'll be honest, I like Mephiles. I think Mephiles is a great villain, and it's too bad that he was written out the way that he was, because it would be interesting to see what Mephiles would do if he could come back. But I do kind of see some ways of that happening, so let's go ahead and actually talk about the question at hand. Could Mephiles actually have a future? So there is a lot to say about like a great villain like Mephiles, because, you know, Shadow, when he first debuted, he was a great villain. He was a great character, and he was supposed to die and not be brought back at the end of Sonic Adventure 2. But because of his popularity, he was brought back, and now Shadow is a staple part of the Sonic franchise. I think for a long time, people thought that Shadow shouldn't have been brought back, because when they brought him back, it was directly tied into one of the downward slopes of the Sonic franchise. He came back in Sonic Heroes, which barely explained his return. His return was allegedly explained in Shadow the Hedgehog, the video game. And of course, we had Sonic 06 afterwards, and a bunch of other games after that, and it really just seemed like Shadow's history was tainted. But I think with Shadow Generations, he basically reclaimed his history. He reclaimed the quality, he reclaimed how great he was written as a character in Sonic Adventure 2, and now it's just like, it's back to square one basically. Shadow is an amazing character again, and he can do no wrong. And so could we see something similar happen to Mephiles? Well, here's the thing about Mephiles. He started off bad. He started off in a terrible game, and he was at least one of the highlights of that game story-wise. I mean, Mephiles was a very interesting character, and it was great to follow like his intentions and what his schemes and plans were. It definitely was one of the best parts of Sonic 06. But I would say Mephiles hits a little different in terms of the fact that he was really effective as a single game character. He came in, basically almost led to the complete destruction of the world, and was gone. That just proves as to how intense and scary he is, and that he is so like terrifying and so dangerous that he's not even allowed to be in the current timeline. Like, that's how big of a villain he is. So I would say that like if they did decide to bring him back, it would kind of cheapen that a little bit, you know, make Mephiles not seem as dangerous or as scary as he is. What we could see, if Sega was really bold, is we could see a reimagining of Sonic 06 and really give Mephiles his flowers in terms of like a good proper game for him to start in. But I mean, I definitely don't see that happening. Sonic 06 is something that I'm sure Sega wants to leave behind as much as they can, you know, besides things like bringing back Kingdom Valley and Shadow Generations. I could also see that they could do a game that involves Sonic traversing dimensional rifts, and Sonic 06 and Mephiles' storyline could be brought back in that way. I think it'd be a bit of an interesting concept for a game as well, because Sonic does have multiple dimensions that he's partaken in. I mean, you could go to Sonic Boom, for instance. You could also go to Sonic X. You could go into the Archie comics. There's a lot of things that you could take Sonic through. The movie universe, you know, you could have some missions and interactions in the movie version of Sonic. And so a dimensional rift kind of game, wow, it sounds a little bit messy, could be the way to bring Mephiles back in like a more important and concrete role. And I don't know if that's like the best idea for this franchise at this point, but it would be interesting, I will say that. And Mephiles definitely has what it takes to be an extremely effective character in this context. Also though, I think an easier solution that is much more realistic, but I don't really see them doing anyway for some reason, is just include Mephiles in some spin-offs. Like, just let him be like a racer in like Team Sonic Racing 2, or let him be like in the next party game, or put him in Sonic Rumble. Like, I don't know. Mephiles doesn't really have to have a story reason for being there. He could just be in the spin-offs, and I think it'd just be great to have him deliver lines and such, and really just hear more about his character, do like these spin-off games. And well, yeah, I think that'd be an easy way to bring back Mephiles in a way that'll keep people happy, but also doesn't tarnish his legacy, basically. Those are my overall thoughts about whether or not Mephiles has a future. I kind of hope they don't bring him back ultimately, because I think that his storyline is very effective as a one-off storyline, and Shadow Generations is a game where bringing him back just made sense given the circumstances of the game. But if you try to like really bring him back in another way for like another game, it could cheapen that legacy and that reputation he has, and it will just make him not as good of a character as he used to be potentially, unless they did just an amazing job at this new game, which honestly I'll give Sonic Team the benefit of the doubt, because they really proved me wrong with Shadow Generations. And Sega as a whole has been doing really well this year. They've gotten a lot of greatly reviewed games this year, and nothing that really seems to be a big flop. So who knows, if they find a good idea for Mephiles and they want to bring him back, I'm all for seeing what it's like. But I wouldn't say it's necessary. I don't think Mephiles needs to come back. I think Mephiles really did what he was supposed to do in Sonic 06, and Shadow Generations just sort of seemed like an encore to reminisce about how great he was in that game. But Mephiles truly is one of the biggest stars of Sonic 06, and also is one of the biggest stars of Shadow Generations, and not the biggest star if it wasn't for Shadow himself. I mean, I'll be honest, he definitely eclipsed Black Doom's boss. He definitely eclipsed Black Doom. So I don't know. Mephiles the Dark, what a great effective villain. I was so happy to see him back in Shadow Generations, and I do wish I can see him back in like more simpler ways, like through spin-off games and such at least. If they do try doing a story thing with him, then I'm curious to see what they come up with. But alright y'all, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do y'all love Mephiles the Dark? What did you think about him in Sonic 06, and what did you think about him in Shadow Generations? And do you want to see him come back? And if you want to see him come back, in what ways would you like to see him come back? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But until then, yeah, I know it's been a tough week for my Americans out there. It's been a very stressful week. I don't want to talk too much about that because I just want to keep things fun. But just so you know, this will always be a place for you to just escape the world and talk about your favorite video games. I'm really excited to hear more about that SpongeBob game in particular. I hope there's more news about that soon. And I also got some exciting projects coming up about some of the upcoming games. Like I got a big Shadow Generations video coming up soon. And also I'm gonna get Mario and Luigi Brothership. I think it comes out today that this video is coming out. So I'm gonna get to play that. I have heard some mixed things about the game, so I'm very curious to see how it turns out when I play it. But all right, y'all, thank you so much. This is Riders, riding out.